Hello YouTube family, Carl Baldassarre. We have an interesting episode tonight. We're going to actually do an album review of Led Zeppelin's most diverse album, Houses of the Holy. And the way we're going to do this is to try to recapture the experience of hearing it for the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to each song one track at a time, and then come back into the video studio and give you my impressions just after listening to each track. I've been listening to this music for so long, but I want to try to inhabit the moment of first hearing the music and just give you my reactions to justify why I think this album is the most diverse album in Led Zeppelin's catalog. So we'll start with the opening track, The Song Remains the Same. I'm going to go have a listen, and I'll be right back. All right, The Song Remains the Same. That is an incredible opening track. And right off the bat, I think the difference that I experience with this, given all the previous albums of Led Zeppelin, is that this is a very clean sounding guitar orchestra. And so with Led Zeppelin's background and Jimmy Page's background being really heavy in the blues, by the time you get to this track, you're hearing a very different sort of vista. So we have these shimmering, clean guitars, but they're no less powerful. That really strikes me about this track. And I also like the fact that it's got tremendous energy to open the album. That's not unusual, but definitely the timbre of the guitars is really quite unusual. Love the pedaling bass, and it reminds me, actually, I think if I were to guess, and if you were to ask Jimmy Page, I think the bones of this track came from a Yardbirds track that he did called Tinker Tailor Soldier Sailor. Go listen to that Yardbirds track and you'll hear the same intro with the same suspended chords and the same sort of pedaling, pounding bass. Very, very cool. But I did do some research and I found out that this track was kind of pre-orchestrated by Jimmy Page at his home studio, and it sounds like a guitar track similar to what 10 Years Gone became, where he brought to the studio actually a finished orchestrated track. This is a guitar orchestration that happened to have a song put to it after the fact. There's 3 incredible guitar solos, but again, they're all really clean. They're meek, but they're not powerless. They're very, very powerful. The only thing I can think about in terms of clean electric guitars, the intro to Led Zeppelin 3, which Immigrant song, is the Hammer of the Gods sort of riff, actually is a pretty clean guitar. So I think that was a forebearer to the sounds of the electric guitars on Song Remains the Same. There's a lot of different picking techniques that Jimmy's using here. You're seeing a little bit more of his influences from country guitar picking in this. It's really an astounding track. I guess if anything came before it, not much that I can think of that sounded like it. It kind of reminds me of like a Byrds track with all those jangly 12 strings, but like Byrds on steroids. I mean, this thing is really, 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 really amped up. And the other thing is, it's sort of pointing towards Led Zeppelin's more inventive type of song forms. This is an unusual song form, but it's an extraordinary opening track, and it was really pleasant to kind of sit down and think about it in the context of what came before it on the previous Led Zeppelin albums. We're going to take a break. I'm going to go listen to the second track, which is the Rain Song. Wow. The Rain Song. Where do you begin? First of all, as a second track, it's beautifully programmed against The Song Remains the Same, the opening track, but they never did anything like this track before or maybe even after. You know, the intro guitar figure, has this beautiful sort of half-step movement, and there is some rumor out there that Jimmy Page was told by George Harrison of the Beatles, why don't you ever write a ballad? And so this song was sort of written as an homage to the Beatles because it has sort of that half-step movement of Something in the Way on the beginning guitar arpeggios. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's certainly very effective here as well. I mean, this is kind of a classical orchestral track. It has a little bit of kind of the Zeppelin heaviness about 2/3 of the way in. But there was nothing like this track in the Zeppelin catalog before. Frankly, there was nothing like this in anybody's catalog before. This is an astounding piece of music and arrangement and textures that are incredibly unique. My impressions in listening to it, the things that jump out to me in terms of how diverse this is for Led Zeppelin, first off is Robert Plant's voice. The first 2/3, he's singing in such a vulnerable way. I mean, and he sounds like he's right in the room with you. He's just very tender, he's very exposed, he's very naked, and you don't have that shrieking thing that you always had, which I love, of course, in Robert Plant. I mean, this was new ground for them. And I think it's the first time you're kind of hearing that coming from Led Zeppelin. The mood of this song is, again, kind of classic Led Zeppelin, where they're mixing genres and mixing moods. The mood that you get from this is a mixture between kind of melancholy and then kind of hopeful exultation, and they shape-shift through those moods very, very smoothly. You know, those major ninths that slide down a half step are so kind of sad, but then they sort of brighten things up as they go. It's incredible, and as I was mentioning, kind of the classical aspects of it, even on the drumming, I hear Bonham doing very orchestral kind of playing in the first 2/3. He's using brushes, and again, he's approaching the kit like a percussion section of an orchestra. It's really quite beautiful, and the outro is masterful. That last sort of 30-second outro, I mean, so many bands, so many musicians really just kind of either fade out or they'll just have a good button on the end of a song. This is a beautifully sort of slowly expiring piece of music that's, you know, has its outro as something that's really, really important to the track. So it's filled with a lot of themes, a lot of classical themes that yada da 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 dum ba dee dum yada da 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 dum. So classical. So again, it's very diverse for Led Zeppelin, and it's an incredible complementary piece of the opening track of Song Remains the Same. So we're now going to go to track 3, which is Over the Hills and Far Away. Let's go have a listen to that. Okay, we just listened to Over the Hills and Far Away. It is really hard to hear these things fresh after you've heard them for 50 years, but I was struck by how beautifully programmed this side of the album is, coming from the Rain song with its very tender kind of ending, and how this starts out very folky. The other thing I noticed is that it seems to me this piece is actually a triumph of Led Zeppelin, building on Led Zeppelin 3, where they had a lot of folk elements in it. So there was a lot of acoustic guitar stuff like you have in Over the Hills and Far Away, but they really married it up with the rhythm section halfway through the song. And it really is a rocking song, but if you listen, there's not a lot of anything heavy in the guitars at all. Again, it's kind of power through meekness, and there's some really great riffs, you know, the da-da, 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 da. But it's driven by Bonham and John Paul Jones, and it's a very typical display of Led Zeppelin's toying with the idea of light and heaviness and shade and color. It is a song that really has that sort of dichotomy. There's a little hint of funkiness during the guitar solo, and I think that is going to echo later in the album because I know what's coming in terms of a funk piece of music. But again, I think Robert Plant's voice is also emblematic of how unique this album was. The song starts out with him, again, being very vulnerable, almost sweet, when he's talking about, hey lady, you've got the love I need. Again, it's not your, you know, whole lot of love, you know, kind of vocal track on it. But it's a beautiful piece, and I think it sits really nice on the album. It is more Zeppelin-like in kind of that light and shade sort of coloration, but it definitely is a maturing evolution of the band. And overall, it's just a really, really pleasant piece to experience. What just happened? I just got crunged. I mean, nothing can prepare you, especially listening to those first 3 tracks, for what just happens with the crunge. I mean, has there ever been a sharper left turn on any Led Zeppelin's albums or on any albums? I mean, that is just outrageous to come in with that drum riff, which is so ballsy and so messed up. And then the song takes off and you're in this sort of funk world, but not quite, because you can't dance to it. I think that was the point of it. And clearly this was the one and only truly funk piece that Led Zeppelin did, so there you have it in terms of trying to push for diversity on the album. They nailed it with this track, and where they placed it was purposely jarring to the listener, but it had the intended effect. It was to make you cringe over the crunge. And having played this song live myself, I know this is where keyboard players go to die, because what John Paul Jones does with those synth brass parts is highly irregular, to say the least. But no, it's just a really uplifting, crazy, jarring song that is a world unto itself. And it really lets you know that we're not done with this album. There are going to be some more surprises. So it does play that role, the crunge. All right, so now we're going to go and flip the album over, kind of take a breath, because we just got crunged, and we're going to start side 2 of Houses of the Holy. We'll be right back. Side 2 of Houses of the Holy. Let's get the party started with Dancing Days, man. So we flipped the album, we just listened to this song, and it's amazing how you can go from the end of the first side, which is the most undanceable song in the history of rock, the crunge, to actually a very danceable beat. I gotta think they knew what they were doing when they did that. And I think the thing that strikes me about Dancing Days is that it's kind of a straight ahead, pulse, great rockin' song. And I think what makes this album so diverse for Led Zeppelin has a lot to do, yes, with a lot of the clean guitars that have power, but it is definitely in Robert Plant's way that he's singing. He's really exploring a lot of different aspects of his voice for the first time. We get a lot of lower registration. He's exploring how he's using melody. In this one, it's almost like a recitative, or he's sort of just talking. There's very little melodic movement in it, but it's extremely effective, kind of monotone. Of course, and he's got some great lyrics here. The one that's always talked about is the lion standing alone with a tadpole in a jar. I'll let you imagine what that might mean. But it's very, very cool song. Love the kind of halfway through you get the slide guitar happening, you get the organ that's kind of shadowing it, very, very cool. You have this Lydian feel that's going on. It's quite typical Led Zeppelin, but it's different on this album because it's just kind of a straight ahead rocker. So in and of itself, it sits very nicely in the portfolio of the album Houses of the Holy. So there you have Dancing Days. And we're gonna go off and listen to the next track. We'll be right back. Well, we've just been to Mak'r, and that's not a question. That's a place. Yeah, so the second track on the second side, which really kind of pairs well with the up-tempo of Dancing Days, you go right into what Americans call Dire Mak'r, but it's a British guys being cheeky with Mak'r. So we have this reggae kind of song, very ethnic, bit of a travelogue by Led Zeppelin. I think this album actually really sort of is a reflecting pond. Led Zeppelin reflecting kind of their travels and where they've been, whether it was being inspired by James Brown for the Crunge, or whether it be just Jamaican music here in Jamaica. This track really to me is about John Bonham. Excuse me. This track is about John Bonham. I'll put that down right now. And just an incredible drum track, and it's so powerful. Again, I have this kind of reminder that this pairing of these clean sounding guitars, almost like rubber band sounding guitars, really, really sort of like ethnic instruments, paired with Bonham's just heavy drumming, is really powerful when you put those two things together. And there's sort of a trust in this band that a lot of bands didn't have, which is they kind of together relied on each other to fill out the sound. No one instrument had to carry it all. And it's really hard for electric guitarists to kind of lay back and let the band create the power versus just turning your amp up to 10 and wailing. And this is such that track. Again, you see Plant kind of laying back vocally with a few breaking through. He's kind of dotting the song with some higher register things, but again, he's quite laid back here. It's just a very lighthearted track. You know, some people don't like it, but again, it's part of what makes this album so diverse, is to have this reggae-infused track. That's the last thing you'd expect from Led Zeppelin. Oh, they got panned for this, by the way, in the press. But I think it's quite effective when you step back and look at the overall portfolio of the album. So there you have it, track 2 on side 2, Mak'r. We're gonna head back and check out the next track. I'm not sure I know where to begin. We just listened to No Quarter, and I have to tell you, it has the most incredible stopping power. I mean, apart from this dramatic mood change going from the lighthearted Mak'r to No Quarter, which is very stunning, kind of like the left turn that we had with the Crunge. This is an invention. This is nothing like anything else in their catalog. This is a universe.
Close the door, put out the light. No, they won't be home tonight. The snow falls hard.
I have to tell you, it's kind of a sobering, a bit of a frightening piece. It is so powerful and palpable. You know, what struck me is just the way, you know, the keyboards come in, have that sort of watery effect on them, the same thing that the vocals actually have, but it is a little bit psychedelic. But for me, it's kind of like the experience of it was a funhouse, a creepy funhouse mirror sort of experience. And it had this sort of Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre bleakness, this winter kind of bleakness to it. Again, it's just so powerful. It's its own invention and world. Love the interlude in the middle there, where we have the piano comes in, and then you have the guitar solo, and it's supported by the key synth parts in there. Yeah, I mean, this is really an inventive piece of music. It's really, really staggering. You're starting to see how we have this mosaic of all these different pieces. It's really setting in high relief the contrast of all the music on the album. So it's very effective in that regard, and again, it really supports the notion that we have a very diverse album here. I mean, how do you go from Mak'r into this sort of Dickens sort of world? The other thing I should say is part of the diversity on this album, I think, might be owed to the fact that the band members, especially Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones, were using home recording equipment and doing a lot of writing, pre-writing and orchestration at home. No Quarter was a piece that John Paul Jones brought to the table. They tried to do it on Led Zeppelin 4, wasn't quite ready. I'm glad it wasn't, because to see it in full form is great. But I think that writing that they were doing apart and then bring it together in a collaboration, I think that really allowed for the album to be so diverse, where each of the members, like Bonham bringing the Mak'r drum sound, drum intro pattern, Page bringing in his Over the Hills and Far Away, his sketch for The Song Remains the Same, John Paul Jones bringing in No Quarter. I think all of that coming from the different threads in the band, pulling it together, really does help sort of exemplify the diversity of the album. So, wow, that was really surprising to sit down and listen to it in context with all the other pieces. So we're gonna wrap up. We're gonna go check out the last track on the album, The Ocean, and we'll be right back and give you our thoughts on that. All right, we just finished the album. We listened to the last track, The Ocean, and I have to say, they bring it all around back to center. We have Led Zeppelin being Led Zeppelin, but even a better Led Zeppelin than there was before. The Ocean is an incredible track of the band doing what you'd expect them to do, but in a very mature kind of way. Very memorable track, very, very, very powerful. They had everybody hitting on all their cylinders. You had Page's incredible, iconic guitar solo. Plant is back, singing at the top of his lungs. You got Bonham just absolutely killing it on the kit. And you got John Paul Jones really holding down the fort there. It's just a great rock track and a great album closer, and kind of just, again, kind of brings you back to the center line of what you were expecting with Led Zeppelin, which you didn't get much of that on the album, but they kind of bring it home with that. It really is an amazing track. I love the way that it ends with kind of where they started as musicians, with sort of the kind of 50s rock sound and the sensibility of rockabilly and kind of the doo-wop thing. It's kind of cool that the album ends with sort of reflection about the roots of the band. So the ocean wraps up this incredible, diverse album, Houses of the Holy. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. I do want to say that when I step back and I think about this album, I think about all of the colors that are here. You know, we've got classical music, we've got funk, we got reggae, we got inventions like no quarter. We have interesting experimental things like the Rain song. We have Freight Train like Song Remains the Same. I mean, it really is a great portfolio, an example of all the things that Led Zeppelin stood for, which was exploratory writing, taking on challenges and not staying the same. That's what made this band so great. This album really is a testimony to that sort of spirit of the band. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Love to do another album review. If you want me to do that, I'll be happy to do that for you. Please leave a comment in the comments section. And thank you for all my subscribers. Welcome the new subscribers. Don't forget to hit the like button. Please hit the notification bell so you can keep up with all of my new episodes. I'm Carl Baldassarre, and we will see you again.